A couple of months ago, I had an unsettling experience on Snapchat that still sends chills down my spine. One night, out of nowhere, I received a friend request from someone I didn't recognize. I was curious and added him back, thinking maybe he was someone I had met briefly, or maybe a distant acquaintance. But the moment I accepted, I got a snap from him almost immediately. I opened it, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The picture was of a man in a dark, almost suffocatingly black room. The only light came from the flash of his phone, which he had pointed directly at his face, way too close for comfort. His expression was blank, yet the way he stared into the camera felt wrong. His face was half illuminated, casting eerie shadows, and his eyes seemed hollow, almost lifeless. It didn't look like he was trying to be creepy, but there was an unmistakable sense of unease that made my stomach tighten. He sent me 4 snaps in a row, each one a progressively closer shot of his face. My fingers trembled as I looked at the images, the proximity too intense, too intimate. After the last one, he simply typed, "Hi." I felt uneasy, but I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it was a prank or some weird misunderstanding. But when I asked him who he was, he didn't reply with words. Instead, he kept sending more snaps, just his face, coming closer with each one. I started to feel a deep sense of dread. Something about the snaps seemed so deliberate, like he was trying to invade my space, my comfort zone. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he sent another message. "I'm coming over." My heart stopped. Panic surged through me. I immediately turned off my location and deleted him from my friends list. I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe he was just messing around. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The moment I deleted him, I checked the snaps again. My blood ran cold when I saw the next one. "I already got your location," it read. My mind raced. Was he serious? Was this some kind of twisted game? I tried to calm myself, telling myself that maybe he was bluffing, trying to scare me. But deep down, a gnawing feeling told me this wasn't just some joke. The night dragged on, and I tried to forget about it, convincing myself it was nothing. But as I was about to turn in for the night, the silence of the house was shattered by a knock at the door. A sharp, quick knock. My heart pounded in my chest. Who knocks at midnight? I froze, dread creeping over me like ice. Slowly, I made my way to the window and peeked through the blinds. And there he was. The same man from the snaps, standing on my doorstep. My breath caught in my throat. Panic surged through me, and I sprinted to my room, locking the door behind me. I huddled in the corner, not daring to move, praying he would leave. But then came the sound, soft but distinct. The sound of him trying to open the door. The cold, metallic scraping of the handle turning. My pulse raced, every nerve on edge. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and called 911. My voice was barely a whisper as I told the operator someone was trying to break into my house. Every second felt like an eternity as I stayed hidden in my room, waiting for the police. But just when I thought the noise had stopped, I heard it again, this time, coming from the back door. I held my breath, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. He was trying to break in from there too. I couldn't stay there any longer. The fear that had gripped me was all-consuming. It felt like the walls of my house were closing in, suffocating me. I stayed as quiet as I could, barely daring to breathe, hoping that somehow the police would arrive before it was too late. Finally, I heard sirens. The flashing lights lit up the driveway, and I could hear the police shouting, moving quickly. The man tried to run, but they caught him. I was still in shock, unable to process what had just happened. How had he found me? How did he know where I lived? I didn't recognize him at all. But it didn't end there. A few weeks later, I got another weird message on Snapchat. It was late, and I was alone, my family fast asleep. The message came from an unfamiliar account. The username was odd, something random, something that didn't make sense. I answered, and at first, there was nothing but silence. Then, just as I was about to type a message asking who it was, I heard a whisper on the other end of the line. It wasn't clear at first, but the whisper grew louder, and it sounded like someone was breathing heavily into the phone. The words were muffled, like they were being whispered through a wall, distant and indecipherable. I turned the volume up, straining to hear. It almost sounded like it was coming from inside my own room. Just as I was about to ask again, the line went dead. No warning, no sound, just silence. Moments later, I received a snap from the same account. It was a selfie, but it wasn't a normal selfie. The person in the picture was wearing a clown mask, grinning wide, eyes hollow behind the fake smile. My stomach dropped. It was too surreal. I didn't know what to think, but I messaged them, demanding to know who they were. No reply. Just silence. Then, the next night, as I was at my desk, something caught my eye. Through the window, I noticed someone walking down the street. It was late, too late for anyone to be out. And as they got closer, I froze in horror. The figure was wearing a clown mask, the same mask from the snap. I don't know how I knew, but I did. I felt a cold chill run down my spine as I watched the figure move slowly, deliberately down the street. He didn't come onto my property, but he lingered near the edge of my yard for a few moments before vanishing into the darkness. I ran to the living room to keep an eye on him, but when I looked outside again, he was gone. I blocked the account, but I never heard from him again. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was the same person, and I couldn't stop wondering, how did he know where I lived? How did he know me? Another night, I received a friend request from a woman on Facebook. We had one mutual friend, someone I barely spoke to, but I accepted anyway. We started chatting, and things seemed normal at first. She claimed she was my age and worked in a nearby city. Then, a few hours later, I noticed a car parked across the street from my house. I could see a figure inside, and to my growing horror, it looked like her. I stayed out of sight, not daring to get too close to the window, but when I checked again, she was still there. She didn't leave for a long time. Eventually, she did, but the unease didn't leave me. The next day, she messaged me again, and after a short conversation, she asked if we could meet. I told her I was busy. She didn't take it well. Her tone shifted, and she became rude, almost demanding. Then she asked, "Are you home right now?" I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I confronted her, asking if she was the one in the car last night. She denied it, of course, and that's when I blocked her. Later that night, she showed up at my door. She knocked violently, her voice rising to a shout as she demanded that I let her in. I was paralyzed with fear. I called the police, and when they arrived, they got her to leave. I was terrified she would come back, but thankfully, she didn't. It wasn't until later that I contacted the mutual friend we shared. He told me he had no idea who she was. I still don't know how she found me or why she came to my house, but I'll never forget the fear I felt that night. It's a reminder sometimes, the people behind the screens aren't who they say they are. And some people can find you, no matter how much you try to hide. I was terrified, praying that the man had just left. The seconds felt like minutes, and the minutes felt like hours. My thoughts raced through every worst-case scenario, but I stayed still, barely breathing, listening for any sign of movement. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard a phone call coming in. My heart skipped a beat. It was the police. I picked up the phone, hearing muffled voices in the background. Then the officer's voice came through loud and clear. "We've got him. He's been caught." A wave of relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by dread. I heard voices downstairs. Was it the police? Was he still out there? My heart hammered as I stayed hidden, paralyzed by fear. Suddenly, I heard a knock at my bedroom door. My whole body froze. The voice on the other side was low but urgent. "Police." I nearly collapsed in relief as I fumbled to open the door. One of the officers stepped in and said they'd caught the man who had been trying to break in. He was arrested just as he'd managed to pry the back door open, but they were quick enough to catch him before he could get far. I tried to calm my racing thoughts, but it was hard. The officer told me that the man hadn't stolen anything or caused much damage, just a few scratches to the back door where he'd tried to force it open. But it didn't matter. My sense of security had been shattered. I was rattled, shaken to my core, and I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had taken root inside me. I didn't want to be alone that night, but everyone was already asleep. I felt like I was on edge for days, the weight of what had just happened hanging over me. I tried to push it out of my mind, but it lingered, a constant, gnawing reminder that someone had been watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. A few weeks later, it all started again. I was sitting on the couch, eating dinner, mindlessly watching TV when the noise started. At first, I thought it was just the sound of someone knocking, or maybe some pipes rattling. But it was loud, too loud. Bang, bang, bang. 3 forceful bangs from the wall directly behind me. My stomach lurched, and I stood up quickly. What the hell was that? I hadn't made any noise. I was alone in my apartment, with just the quiet hum of the TV, and yet there it was, a loud banging noise that came from next door. It was unsettling. The knocks weren't normal. They sounded like someone was angry, pounding their fists into the wall, demanding attention. I walked toward the window, trying to look out, but there was no one there. Still, I felt a chill creeping up my spine. It wasn't right. I muted the TV, trying to listen more carefully. For a moment, everything was silent, just the usual sounds of the apartment settling. But then, without warning, the banging started again. It continued, echoing off the walls, each bang growing louder and more forceful. Confused and now on edge, I stood in the middle of the living room, unsure of what to do. I wasn't sure if it was my neighbor trying to get my attention, or something worse. I couldn't remember ever hearing them make that much noise before. I debated whether to knock on their door and ask if everything was okay, but something in my gut told me not to. The noise stopped abruptly, but my instincts told me not to relax just yet. I felt a sudden urge to check the front door, so I walked over to it slowly. The knocks I'd heard on the wall had mirrored those I now heard on the front door. It was almost like the same person, heavy, deliberate, insistent. I peeked through the peephole, my breath caught in my throat, and found nothing but darkness. Whoever it was had already left. I exhaled slowly, but my nerves remained high. There was something unsettling about it, something I couldn't shake. I told myself it was probably just my neighbor. Maybe they were annoyed by something. But when I left for work that night, I passed by their door, and that's when everything changed. As I walked down the hall, heading for the stairs, I heard the sound of a door opening behind me. I glanced back, but didn't stop. I didn't want to seem like I was looking for something, but when I reached the stairs, I could hear someone walking just behind me. At first, I thought it was just another resident, but when I reached the bottom, I realized he wasn't just walking, he was following me. I quickened my pace, stepping outside into the cold night air. I glanced over my shoulder and saw him standing about 50 feet away from me, just watching. My pulse spiked, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Why was he just standing there, staring at me from the shadows? I didn't want to make eye contact, so I turned quickly and headed for my car, my hands trembling as I unlocked the door. I left as quickly as I could, but when I returned later that night, around 10 p.m., things took another dark turn. I was passing my neighbor's apartment again when I noticed the door was open. I didn't see anyone, but I heard the soft creak of a door opening, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. My heart raced. Why was he out there so late? What did he want? My instincts screamed at me to hurry up. I sped up, practically running to my apartment. But just as I reached the door, I heard footsteps right behind me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I fumbled for my keys, hands shaking uncontrollably. I managed to unlock the door and slammed it shut as quickly as I could. But before I could even catch my breath, the pounding started. Boom, boom, boom. The banging came again, louder this time, more urgent, more forceful. My heart hammered in my chest as the sound echoed through the room. It was like someone was trying to break the door down with every strike. The force of it rattled the wood, and I instinctively backed away, my body tense and stiff with fear. I gripped my phone tighter, the screen illuminating my trembling hands. My mind raced through every possible scenario, none of them comforting. Should I call the police again? Should I hide, barricade myself in? Should I run? The fear was overwhelming, and my thoughts felt like they were spinning out of control. I could barely breathe, and all I could focus on was that sound, the relentless thudding against the door. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the banging stopped. For a split second, I thought my heart might burst from the silence. Was it over? Was I safe now? The stillness felt oppressive, like the world had gone quiet just to watch me fall apart. I stood there for what felt like forever, unable to move. The air around me felt heavy, pressing against my chest, as though the walls themselves were closing in. My thoughts were tangled, my mind a blur of fear and disbelief. I wanted to believe it was nothing, that it had all been some kind of nightmare. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. I could feel it, something wasn't right. The silence stretched on. My breath came in shallow gasps as I debated what to do next. Could I trust the stillness? Or was this just the calm before the storm? I wasn't sure what was worse, the deafening banging or this eerie silence. So thick it felt like I was suffocating. I couldn't just stay there forever, frozen in fear. Slowly, inch by inch, I made my way to the door. My hand hovered over the doorknob, and for a moment, I thought I might lose my nerve completely. But I had to know. I had to see if the threat was real. With a deep breath, I slowly turned the knob, opening the door just a crack, peering out into the hallway. Nothing. The hallway was empty. The building seemed eerily still, as if nothing had happened at all. My heart beat in my throat, and I felt a brief surge of relief. Maybe it was nothing, I thought. Maybe I had just imagined the whole thing. My mind started to convince me that I had overreacted, that it was just a late-night scare. But as I turned to close the door, something caught my eye, a shadow in the corner of the hallway. I froze. It was quick, fleeting, but there, just for a moment, I saw a figure, a man, standing motionless in the shadows. He wasn't supposed to be there. I didn't know him, and he didn't belong in my building. The terror surged back in an instant. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my body trembling uncontrollably. I called the police, heart racing, breath coming in jagged gasps. They said they'd send someone over to check it out. but I didn't know how long it would take. I couldn't trust myself to stay calm. The feeling of being watched, of having a stranger so close, made my skin crawl. The police arrived eventually, but by then, the man was gone. They searched the building, spoke to neighbors, but there was no sign of him. Everything seemed to return to normal, but the knot in my stomach remained, a tight, unshakable feeling that something was terribly wrong. The next day, I spoke with one of my neighbors, trying to make sense of it all. I asked about the man, the one I had seen in the hallway. She looked at me with confusion, her expression shifting into something colder. "That apartment has been vacant for weeks," she said, voice flat. "There's no one living there." I felt the blood drain from my face as the words hit me. I knew she had to be mistaken. I had seen him clear as day standing right there in front of me. But she insisted, and so did the leasing office when I went to ask them. "The apartment's been empty for months," they told me, no hint of uncertainty in their voices. They didn't know who he was or how he had gotten in. I didn't know what to think anymore. How had he known where I lived? How had he gotten in? The questions kept circling in my mind, gnawing at me like a rat chewing at the edges of my sanity. I had no answers, just an overwhelming sense of dread. It was as though this man had slipped in from nowhere, like a shadow that had no reason to exist, yet somehow found me. That was the last time I saw him. The apartment remained empty. No one else reported anything strange, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching me. I would catch myself looking out of the corner of my eye, expecting to see him standing in the shadows again, waiting for the right moment. Sometimes, when it's late and I'm alone, I hear a faint noise, like someone trying to get in. The memory of that banging, that desperate sound of someone trying to break through my door, still haunts me. I don't know if it was just a random encounter, or if something darker is at play. But one thing's for sure, I haven't felt safe in my own home since. And every time I hear a knock at the door, my heart skips a beat, wondering if he's come back to finish what he started.